She entered the courtroom expecting fairness, but within seconds, everything went wrong. The very people sworn to uphold the law turned against her. A slap, a moment of silence, and the room froze. Everyone thought she was powerless, just another victim of injustice. But what happened next left the entire courtroom stunned, and it changed the meaning of justice forever. Who really holds the power when the truth is finally revealed? It was supposed to be an ordinary day inside the county courthouse. The wooden benches creaked under the weight of restless onlookers, their whispers echoing against tall marble walls. Sunlight cut through the stained glass windows, painting the room in fragments of color. At the center of it all sat a black woman named Alana, quiet yet dignified, her eyes steady as she clutched a folder against her chest. She wasn't there to make a scene. She was there to observe, to learn, to be part of a system she had dedicated years of her life to studying. Most of the people in that room had no idea who she was. To them, she was just another face in the crowd, someone without power, without status. But there was something different about her presence, an aura of determination that seemed to unsettle those who underestimated her. The courthouse that day was tense. Officers moved with an authority that felt more like intimidation than order, their glances sharp, their stance unyielding. Alana noticed, but she kept her composure. She believed in the process, believed in justice. After all, she had worked tirelessly for years to prove herself in a world that often tried to silence voices like hers. But beneath the polished surface of that courtroom, something darker was brewing. Injustices weren't always hidden in shadows. Sometimes they played out in the open, in front of everyone, daring the world to look away. Alana didn't know it yet, but she was about to become the center of a moment that no one in that room would ever forget. The hearing began like any other. Papers shuffled, the judge adjusted his glasses, and lawyers whispered hurriedly to their clients. Alana sat quietly, observing the process, her mind focused on every detail. She had spent years buried in law books, analyzing precedents, and dreaming of the day she could contribute to real justice. But what unfolded before her eyes was nothing like the ideals she studied. A black man was brought before the court, accused of petty theft. His clothes were worn, his hands trembling as he tried to speak. Before he could explain himself, two officers flanking him tightened their grip, pulling him roughly toward the bench. Their actions were harsh, unnecessary, and loud enough to silence the room. Alana felt her chest tighten. This wasn't procedure. This was humiliation. She leaned forward slightly, unable to stay detached. She watched as the officers smirked, exchanging glances as if the man's dignity was theirs to crush. Then, one of them looked out at the audience. His gaze landed on her. For reasons she couldn't understand, his expression hardened. He whispered something to his partner, and in seconds, both men were moving toward her. Alana's pulse quickened. She hadn't spoken, hadn't interfered, hadn't done anything but watch. Yet the officers treated her presence like a threat. One of them barked at her to stand, his voice slicing through the air. She hesitated, confused, but before she could respond, the officer's hand shot out, knocking the folder from her grasp. Papers scattered across the polished floor like broken glass. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. She bent to pick them up, but before she could, a sharp crack echoed through the chamber. A hand had struck her across the face. The room fell into stunned silence. Every eye turned, some wide in shock, others averting quickly as if pretending they hadn't seen. The officer's palms still hovered in the air, his chest heaving with the arrogance of someone who believed there would be no consequences. Alana staggered, her cheek burning. In that instant, time slowed. She wasn't just humiliated, she was being tested. She could see the doubt flicker in the crowd, the silent question on every face. Would she fight back? Or would she shrink into the silence so many before her had been forced into? The judge cleared his throat but said nothing. The bailiff shifted uncomfortably, yet remained rooted to his spot. The law, it seemed, had abandoned her in its very house. Alana steadied herself, refusing to let the tears fall. She straightened her back, meeting the officer's eyes with a defiance that pierced through his bravado. The papers at her feet didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that the room had seen it. They had seen the truth, raw, unfiltered, undeniable. But none of them knew who she really was, and none of them were prepared for what would happen when her identity was finally revealed. The sting of that slap still lingered on Alana's face, but it wasn't pain that consumed her. It was resolve. The entire courtroom sat frozen, breaths held, waiting to see what she would do. The officers stood tall, convinced their authority would silence her. They didn't realize they had just crossed a line that could never be erased. Alana took a step forward. Each movement was deliberate, steady, filled with a strength that defied the humiliation they tried to impose. She bent down, lifted her scattered papers with trembling hands, and then calmly walked past the officer who had struck her. He smirked, expecting her to leave quietly. But instead of exiting the courtroom, she kept moving, straight toward the elevated bench where the judge sat. Gasps erupted as she climbed the steps. The judge blinked in disbelief, his gavel slipping slightly from his hand. And then, with a calm authority that silenced the whispers, Alana placed her folder on the bench. Her voice rang clear, steady, unshaken. She introduced herself, not as a spectator, not as a victim, but as Judge Alana Brooks, newly appointed to the very court where she now stood. The room erupted in chaos. The officers' smirks vanished instantly, replaced by shock and dread. The judge quickly rose, bowing his head, realizing he had been sitting in the seat that no longer belonged to him. Cameras clicked, pens scribbled, and the public gallery leaned forward, realizing they had just witnessed history unfold before their eyes. The officer who struck her stepped back, his face pale, his authority crumbling in seconds. He had assaulted not just a woman, not just a citizen, but the presiding judge of the court. For the first time that day, silence returned. But it wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of reckoning. The courtroom that had once felt suffocating now carried a different weight. Every person inside sat motionless, realizing they had witnessed a moment that would be remembered for years. Alana didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her very presence behind that bench was louder than any gavel strike. She looked out across the room, not at the officers who had humiliated her, but at the people, the witnesses, the defendants, the young interns who had come to learn about justice. For them, this moment wasn't just about her. It was about the promise that the law could still belong to those it had failed. The officers were quickly escorted out, their badges stripped, their arrogance shattered. No uniform could protect them from accountability now. The same silence that once allowed injustice to thrive had turned into a silence of shame, a silence that demanded change. Alana sat in the judge's chair with a steady composure. She was more than a victim, more than the slap that had tried to break her dignity. She was the embodiment of resilience, a reminder that even in the face of public humiliation, truth has a way of rising. When she finally spoke, her words were not of anger, but of resolve. She reminded the courtroom and the world that justice isn't about uniforms or power. It's about fairness, dignity, and accountability. And those who abuse authority, no matter how untouchable they believe they are, will eventually answer to the truth. Outside, the story spread quickly. Headlines carried her name, not as a victim of injustice, but as the judge who stood tall in the very moment they tried to break her. And for everyone who had ever felt silenced, forgotten, or overlooked, her story became a question that echoed far beyond the walls of that courtroom. How many more times must the oppressed rise before the world finally learns what justice truly means?